Nature always wears the colors of the spirit. Okay, welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is a scene that I completed just this morning. Started it yesterday, but I had a couple moments that I really needed to let the scene colors kind of set up a little bit before I went on to the next step. The scene for me, or this video, is kind of more about I mean, it has composition and color additions and whatnot, but it's just kind of going with kind of a, maybe an unconventional color scheme, than what one might think of when kind of approaching scenic stamping. But when I approach scenic stamping, I do it kind of more with the idea of some kind of emotional quality that I might want to depict through the use of color, and it's not necessarily limited to what one might think of as kind of scenic stamping colors, mainly greens, blues, and browns, or something of that sort. I think that we shouldn't limit ourselves to, a given set of, hue or a certain scheme. If you like certain colors, if you have a favorite color, that might be outside of those kind of traditional, or what one might think of as a traditional, palette for scenes. Because I think it opens up a lot of different possibilities as far as kind of the emotional quality of a scene. I think when we use other colors too, when we open things up, it just opens up so many more possibilities as far as personal expression goes as well. This one is based somewhat on kind of a magenta dominant theme in here, and I've used a lot of browns as well. Pinks, hot pinks, believe it or not, and kind of going with that type of palette. I'm just going in here and adding a few little additional highlights with the reddish tones in here, with all that magenta and pink and whatnot. Sometimes it's fun to go in and add additional highlights and embellishments with media that relates to that type of color scheme. So in this case, this is just like a little pastel pink paint pen. It's a Sharpie paint pen. And just, I'm just adding a couple little stars in here and little highlights in the water, mostly in the lighter areas. I don't want it to stand out too much, but one of the things that I felt that the scene could certainly use were these little kind of hovering fireflies down here in the bottom section. This is a fairly large scene. For me, at least. I don't usually work this large. It's an 8.5 by, let me see, it was 4 or 4.5, I think. 4.5. I don't know. I just wanted to work on a different ratio, different size than what I've done before, just to kind of play around. I've done longer ones before, like a 4.25 by 11 or something like that, just kind of cutting a, letter size paper down the middle or something like that. But I want to start playing around with things like squares and, super elongated scenes, kind of more in the ratio of what, a movie might be done in. I think there's a lot of different possibilities that you can come up with on different formats as well. So this one, might say it's a different format in terms of the ratio of length to width, height, and maybe color scheme. I've worked in these color schemes before, but some people haven't. A lot of alcohol-based pens in the cabin right here. I don't know, I could use a little bit more modeling in here as well, maybe making the edge of the sides of the shack a little bit darker, so it looks like the light is coming from above a little bit more so, but maybe even more than that. I kept the lighting within that cabin area lighter, and having it reflected down here in the water. That was kind of a fun thing to do. So anyways, kind of a fun scene. I like playing around with different color schemes, just to, I don't know, kind of mix things up in terms of, I don't know, your color palette, and just kind of playing around with new looks once in a while, and trying to, kind of experimenting, you might say, with some different color schemes. So anyways, I matted this several times with kind of a real thin white, kind of bring out those little white stars, or little brighter stars, lighter ones. Gold tends to work really good with reds and whatnot, so I put this gold metallic matting on here, another little red to bring out the reds and magentas, and this is a real deep navy perimeter right here. It's almost black. It looks black, I think, on the camera, and it looks black, and in person as well. But I don't have a glossy black, so I'm just going with that one. So, anyways, those are fun little things to do. So, mix it up. Try some different color schemes than what you've used in the past, and I think you'll come up with some really nice results. Sometimes when you go with kind of a really unconventional color scheme, it does look weird in the beginning, until you really lay down some extra colors and really get things saturated and whatnot with some additional tone. But things like lime green scenes or emerald greens can look really kind of weird, or if you're laying down some of the really super bright, intense colors, it looks strange. But keep working with it, and try to work through a range of values, starting from light to dark, and really get things blended on there, and I don't know, things kind of come out with an interesting look in the end results quite often. So you get to surprise yourself, but I don't know, maybe you can start off with your favorite color and go from there. So anyways, if you watch the scene, I hope you enjoy the creation of it. It was a lot of fun. Okay, let's see. We're going to stamp out a Bayou scene using the Bayou shack and some other images that kind of pair with that. We have some Cypress knees, Cypress cluster, and I don't know, we'll use some other textures like these tiny rocks in here. But in the spirit of some kind of quote-unquote funky color schemes that you wouldn't necessarily associate with doing landscapes, I was thinking about the color magenta, okay? And I don't know, I mean, if you're doing some kind of deep space, figure or something like that, like a nebula or something, you might see something like this. So yeah, you might see it, I don't know, in some area of the sky, let's say on a deep kind of sunset twilight or something like that. But for kind of the majority of a scene, you wouldn't necessarily think of something like that, probably. But as far as landscape stamping goes, and scenic stamping, crafting, just in general artwork, I don't think we should be confined to what we might think of as, I don't know, our notion of maybe traditional landscape colors, meaning, your browns, greens, blues, or something like that. If someone's favorite color is purple or whatnot, magenta, whatever color scheme you're into, I think you know, that should be an option for some kind of scenic stamping statement. I tend to think that people's favorite colors, I don't know, if you use them in a scene, there might be some kind of a little bit more of a emotional connection with that color, and therefore when you're stamping out or creating some sort of a creative statement, you know, you might be even further invested in it from an emotional standpoint and having more fun with it. So I don't know, that's what kind of, I don't know, our crafting pastime is about anyways, right? It's about kind of emotion and having fun and that sort of thing, as opposed to kind of logical statements. Okay, just inking up the stamp in black. I just had to re-ink it a little bit. My black was kind of dry. I'm going to leave some space. I was thinking about this kind of maybe creating this dramatic overhang. I don't know if it's in the sky, but kind of in the sky area, the area above my Bayou shack stamp. This is a very large stamp. I'm using the unmounted version, of course, and I'm using it on the acrylic block that happens to have the tack and peel material, which allows for that temporary mounting system. Okay, peels right off. Still tacky. If it ever gets untacky, you just kind of rinse it off with some water. Okay, so we have that Bayou shack there, just stamped out in black. Let's take a look here and see if maybe we can use some surrounding imagery. I think maybe I won't use the bottom portion of it. I'll just go for these cypress trees above. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ink up the top portion of that stamp, and I'm going to create this transition of dark to light on here just by removing kind of a good portion of the ink on the bottom side of it, and then I'm going to slightly kind of wipe up the stamp. I want it to go from kind of dry to wet up here in a nice transition. I don't want it to go from, you know, just a hard straight line of, you know, ink and no ink. Okay, I want it kind of wet, medium, dry. All right. So let's see. I think maybe 2 impressions of it will be good, but we'll see. Okay, so this is what I mean here in terms of that transition. You see it going from dark to light like that. That way when it transitions in here, these trees here in the foreground, behind the shack, kind of still stand out. If the impression of those was the same from top to bottom, it would look okay, but these images down here would become a little bit more obscured. All right, now this is looking a little bit empty on this side to me, so let's balance that off a little bit more with some additional trees. I'll just use the same stamp, of course, and a lot of ink off down here. And I'm kind of using a lighter pressure, you know, lighter touch as I kind of move up this stamp, okay? All right. Now, since this part is dry down here, you know, and I didn't ink it up, I don't need to mask off the cabin. If this was inked up from top to bottom and I was stamping in here, you know, I wouldn't want that impression to show up in that cabin right there, so. But being that I wiped most of the ink off, or just didn't even ink it up in that area to begin with, then I don't have to do that. Alright, so this is what we have here. You can go for an even lighter impression back here. I'm kind of thinking about it. Thinking about going for a second impression. Okay, let's just do it. Let me go over here. Okay, not bad. It's a little bit depth. It stamped out darker than I thought it would, but it's still a little bit lighter, so it creates another layer of depth just in the impressions themselves. Okay. All right. Now I'll stamp some other things later, but let's just start on with some additional tone. Or let's see, some clouds. I don't want those clouds in there. All right. Starting off, let's go on with some. Trying to decide on what colors. Okay, just in general, I'll have this area kind of dark, and I have these windows in here. I'm thinking about having those windows light as well as the reflection of the windows down there, as if a light is on inside of that shack. Okay, this is a really light hue. It's called Peach Bellini, and it would be, if I likened it to a distress ink or something like that in terms of the value of it, value in terms of light and dark, it would be like, I think it's called old paper or something like that, of like the distress inks line. But distress inks would be good too. Just pick out kind of one of your lighter ones. Oops, I have some of that black ink on my finger. It's getting on there. Not too big of a deal. Ew. Some of that area is a little bit wet, I think. Yeah. Okay. Since I re-inked that inker, I'm going to have to wait for this to dry a little bit before I start adding this tone in here. But luckily, as far as the video goes, it won't take any time at all. But in my time, in the filming of this, I'll probably wait about 10 minutes or something like that, just for this ink to set up. I can just tell on the top of those trees, it's a little bit wet. Okay, I don't want to smear it. I smeared a couple things a little bit, but those types of things aren't going to matter once I add in all that other tone anyways, because it's going to be fairly dark in there. Alright, so give it a little bit of dark. Okay, back again. It's been about 10 minutes, and the surface is dry to the touch for the most part. Yeah, some of this is still a little bit wet, I see. Now that I'm rubbing across there, I'll try to dab across that instead. So at least I'm not leaving kind of streaks. Okay, at this stage I want to color, but I also want to kind of establish that lighting scheme. This is the lightest of tones, but I'll probably be using some of this this Peach Bellini on the cabin, even though I want the rooftop to remain nice and light, you know, like a three-dimensional object where light is coming from above. So on the vertical sides of the shack, I'll add some tone just to get that established. And you won't see too much of a lighting statement with this first color because I'm going to be adding quite a bit of it over most of the scene. Now in that water where you see that those kind of that reflection from those windows. I'll leave those, you know, somewhat untouched. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a warmer tone in there, such as a yellow, in terms of a kind of a warm light coming from within the structure, which is always fun to do if you can do that on cabins. Of course, that's as if it were a, I don't know, it doesn't have to be a nighttime scene, but kind of a darker scene where you can kind of establish something warm inside. It's somewhat inviting. It creates kind of an emotional statement within the scene. When you're outside and something's nice and warm looking inside, I think we kind of feel like going into that structure, or it makes us curious to know kind of what's in there. Okay, underneath there, that little porch, I'm putting a little bit more of this tone to kind of darken up that area underneath. Again, this is just the first color, so it's just kind of establishing some things, lighting kind of loosely. Alright, now that was the Peach Bellini. So just use any kind of light, warm color. You could use pink too. I'm thinking about using pink in here. Kind of pink relates to the magenta, of course. Okay, now this is pale orange. You can go with an additional tone of like a distress ink, you know, warm tone. Okay. What the main thing what I'm doing here is it's about color to a degree, but it's more about the value in terms of light to dark, working within kind of a given color scheme. So pink or something like that, brown, tan, anything like that would be good. Okay, I'm leaving some areas in the sky a little streakish, you know, some of that white of the paper in some areas, just to give that whole sky a little bit of variation. If you didn't retain any of that, don't worry, but maybe with the additional tones that we'll add in, start to kind of establish some areas that are a little bit lighter and darker, meaning put streaks in some areas and leave other areas as is, okay? So you can still establish light and dark up there, just with your colors yet to come. Okay, adding it around this the vertical sides of the cabin. Okay. All right. Let's do something here. Let's go for an even funkier looking color scheme. That's the whole idea here anyway. Let's do pink. If you have a pink of any value, you can use that. Let's see what it's going to look like, okay? Ooh, pretty weird looking, huh? This is for anyone that likes the color pink. You might say, I know what you're thinking, you say, I like it, but I don't like it in that scene, or in a landscape. Well, we're not done yet, so it's not going to be the predominant color in here by the time I'm done, because I'm going to be running in a lot more color into the scene, okay? So it's kind of being used as a foundation color, but we'll see, okay? I don't know what it's going to look like, but that's where the fun is, in many ways. Okay, just trying to add in some of that color above the shack. Doing the same thing as far as leaving some areas down below lighter than other areas. Okay, let's get a little bit of that color into the cabin vertical sides. And putting a little bit on the horizontal sides too, just to create somewhat of a relationship with that edge. Not the edge, but the vertical sides. You don't want it just one color exclusively on one area, otherwise it looks kind of like an isolated, I don't know, unrelated hue. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I get to it. Alright, wow. That is a really bright foundation color. Okay, so you can kind of see the colors, the lighting scheme starting to come around. Alright, now this is a brown. If you have some distressings, you might have some darker brown tones, like I know the walnut is kind of a darker one. Adding this brown, roughly in about, the same areas that I used with the pink. So this is changing the character of the pink now. When you add these other tones right over the top, kind of mellows it out a little bit. It's not quite as hot of a color, and like a walnut would do that too. As far as the distress ink range of hue. Now if you're doing this, if you're kind of following along and doing a stamp along with this, you don't have to use that pink. I'm working through so many different values and hue that, if you leave out one or more, that's absolutely fine. Not all of us are going to have the same colors. If there were some colors that I didn't have and I was just doing this, I honestly wouldn't miss it. I'm just kind of playing around with whatever I have. Okay, that's the brown. Okay, let's see, this is a wine. Not too much of a difference, but I think I have a lot of the brown still in this tip here, so it's not looking too different. I'm kind of working up to that magenta. That magenta is so bright. It's dark. It's not light, but it's bright. So brightness is a matter of kind of intensity, not, light and dark. Okay. enough of that. This is a pale violet. I don't know if this pale violet's going to show up at all. I have a lot of ink in that tip there. Let's use this. I'm using a different tip now. I think, well, that pale violet shows up a little bit. It's a little bit more of a lavender hue. Okay. Okay. Let's switch back and go to Magenta. I had to look at the bottom. I was thinking, I think that's Magenta. I think there was another Marvy color. Maybe I'm thinking of the plum or wine, but I thought there was another one that was very similar to Magenta. Okay, Magenta, I can tell that. Yeah, it's very, very bright. And it's very... it's almost overpowering. I know I've noticed when I've layered this on, it really applies to the page. Some inks kind of, they're a little bit thicker maybe, or you know, due to the hue, whatever they make that color out of. But this one really, it just transfers instant. It's like that, and there's this other color, Prussian blue, that really applies quickly, no matter how, seemingly no matter how much ink you have laid down. Alright, since this is kind of about Magenta, I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm going to bring some of it into that light area. I didn't like those three so similar in size, so I'm going to run some of this magenta in that top one, that little light area. Okay, still applying. Okay. All right. But let's not stop there. Let's go to my violet pad. Looks like it's getting pretty whipped. Sometimes the pads end up breaking down after a while, the foam. But not for a long time. This pad's probably... I'm guessing a lot of these pads might be 20 years old. My gosh. It's hard to imagine that, but... Because I just know, I don't even, you know, these are the old lids that they used to have. I don't even know if I have some with the newer lids in terms of my demo stamps. Demo pads, I should say. Okay, going on the edges with this color, for the most part. Kind of darkening the edge. Really get some of this down in the four corners. Framing off the top, adding quite a bit to my left and right. top corners. Really cap off the scene. Sometimes in like a swampy area, the water's really dark. So maybe I'll darken some of the water a little bit more. Kind of bring in a little streak of this violet, just to make that water a little bit more varied, I guess. Okay. I kind of have this on its edge. I'm doing this type of thing. So once I do it with one side, I'll flip it around and I'll do it kind of from the other side. Like so. Okay, I kind of like that. Maybe I'll do that up in the sky as well. Getting stamp pad crumbs. Okay. Look at this page right here. All that pink. Okay, let's go to dark brown. If you don't have a dark brown, kind of a really dark brown, you can always go to like a black or something. Or, I mean, believe it or not, I mean, if just any dark hue, you can go with a navy, or if you have a really dark green, you can try that. You know, dark green over the top of purple is not going to look green, so as long as you can keep it out of the white areas, you know, it won't look green. It'll just look like a darker version of something, of whatever you have underneath, for the most part, or it just might look black. Okay, adding in. In most scenes, when I get to this dark, it's a lot more perimeter oriented than I'm doing here. But this scene is getting very dark, so I'm kind of changing the time of day. You know, the darker I get, you know, it keeps getting deeper into, like, say, the twilight hours or something like that. Or it could be pre-dawn as well, or something, you know, in terms of that lightness. Okay, now let's move to black. So we return to our color that we established our first impressions with in terms of the imagery. Flip it around, do the other side of the scene. This is a really long scene. I forgot to mention that. By the way, if you're watching any of these videos, I try to put the materials and stamps used in the see more area below the scene, you know, where it has that little bit of a copy or dialogue. Just open up that see more area, and if I remember, I always kind of put the dimensions of the paper. So this is 8.5 by, I think, 4.5. 4.5 by 8.5. Just working in a little bit of a elongated format. I just wanted to do something besides a quarter-page card or a half-page, you know, exact half-page. I should do some squares sometimes, you know, just to kind of mix things up a little bit. You can get some kind of different looks, I think, you know. There's a different feel to a square format, isn't there? And if you've done any scrapbooking or something like that, you know, a lot of you are familiar with, you know, you do a lot of compositions that are square formatted, or have done. Okay. Put in a little bit of tone above that rooftop. All right, there we have it. Okay, let me put a little bit more up top. All right, now I think additional tone, not tone, but additional imagery in the form of these cypress knees here, a little bit of foreground, maybe up here as well, and I think some color in here. Let me see if I have a really pale yellow. Alcohol-based pen. Let me see what I have here. It's a little bit too light. Or bright. That's really too bright too. I need something pale. I'm thinking about a combination of those two. Well, let me see. See if I can get a little warmth in there without getting it too bright. That's pretty bright, but let me add some of it in here. This is glossy paper, so I can kind of get a little bit of that ink on there. And then this one's lighter, or you can use a blending pen. And let's drag some of that color around in here. Kind of spread it around a little bit. Okay, so let's It's a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit warmer, just in terms of that lighting. Looks okay. But let's do some other things. Let's bring in some alcohol pens. Okay, I have some variations of brown here. Let me start. Ooh, that one's really dark. Let's try this one. This is Biscuit. Get a little additional tone on here. It's much easier with a pen getting the detailed areas than, you know, big kind of wide sponge applicator. Okay. This one's Coffee. I'm going to just put that one away. That one's way too dark. Let's try this one. Sepia. Perfect. In theory. Let's see what it looks like on here. Just laying some down on that rooftop underneath the eaves, maybe. Just some additional hue on the shack and kind of a more detailed application. Laying some down and then going back to my lighter one and just kind of blending that in. The blending one, these alcohol pens tend to go back into solution a little bit. If you hit it with some additional alcohol, it just kind of dissolves it. So that kind of spreads it around a bit. I can bring some of this tone down here too, into the water, some of this brown in kind of a targeted area. You know, if it's kind of reflecting the what's going on above water, you can bring some of the same hue down in that area below. Okay. I'm going to try to hit some of these areas in the wood. I'll just put a few lines on some of them like so. Maybe all of the wood that was used on the cabin is not quite so uniform, so some of them are darker than others. Maybe that'll give it a more kind of rustic feel, you know, appearance to it. Okay, that looks a little bit better to me. All right, now let's add some additional imagery again. This is the Cypress knees, and I will add that here in the foreground. Kind of more in the darkness down here. And let's go for something very bold. Okay. This image is called the Spooky Branch. And I'll have a big overhang right into the scene like so. I want to make sure that ink transfers. Kind of light, even pressure, but I'm kind of letting that sit on the paper a little bit longer than what I would normally do if it was on a blank piece of paper, just because you want that ink to transfer, and if the page is a little bit wet, you don't want it to create somewhat of a vacuum and pull right off. Okay. Kind of creates a dramatic, I don't know, bit of contrast between the sky background and that branch, see? Be kind of a fun card just with that, almost. Maybe going up instead of down. I'd have to do something like that. Okay, now let's see. I don't like these knees just on their own down there. So let's soften that area up a touch and layer those Cypress knees in with something else. And I'll do that with these reeds. Add some additional reeds down below. Kind of frames off the bottom. I don't know, maybe what was that? 6, 7 impressions maybe. Okay. So we have our lighting scheme going, and kind of that color scheme. Violets, browns, magentas. I think this needs some additional, or could use some additional texture and embellishments as far as highlighting goes. But now that branch and those foreground elements down there are really, really wet. So this time I'm going to have to really wait for those to dry. And plus the whole scene's a little bit moist, so these areas right here are really going to have to set up and kind of dry. I'm going to guess a half an hour or so. I could heat set it. Sometimes I don't like heat setting things, you know. I like it to just kind of naturally dry. I don't know if heat setting kind of dulls things out faster. In the end, I like to spray my scenes anyways, but I'm thinking about just giving it a little bit of time to set up, and we'll see how that looks. And I don't know what I would use in here. I don't want to use anything too stark, or do I? Maybe something like some, like some fireflies or something like that in this area would be kind of interesting as a different textural statement, especially in this Bayou swamp area. But we'll think about it. We'll come back to this and see what comes up. Okay, back today, and the scene is completely dry and ready for some additional embellishments, or I don't know, whatever we decide to do on this scene. One of the things that I think about from time to time when doing these scenes is one of the things that's really fun about kind of stamping and doing these landscapes and different projects is that it really allows us to see things that we haven't seen before, and I haven't done a composition like this, or, you know, maybe in this color scheme with this certain, you know, selection of stamps before, so it's always kind of interesting watching something develop and kind of be exposed to something that, you know, yeah, just like I said, it's like previously unseen. And the thing about it is you see it develop by your own hand, so it's always something that's really fun. Okay, now I'm looking at these Cypress knees down here, these little stump things. It's not really a stump, but they're kind of more outlines here. I mean, there's texture in them, but we need to give them some opacity, you know, to make it look like you know, there's more volumes in them than just a you know, black image stamped on top of it. So what I'm going to do is I want to model these a little bit, so I'm going to take my pens and kind of working within our color scheme, I will kind of color them a little bit. This is a kind of a pale pink color, so it kind of goes with the same color scheme. Now, one of the things about this scene at this point in time is it dried with a little bit less of a luster than a, you know, freshly stamped scene, you might say. So, but I know when I spray this, it's going to bring back that saturation of color back into the scene. So that looks like a pretty dark pink now that I've laid down onto the Cypress needs. And what I did was I put it on one half of it, left the other half kind of as is. So it looks a little bit more mottled and rounded, where it's kind of darker on one side and lighter on the middle. So what I've done is on the perimeters, on the outer edges of both Cypress needs, because the light is kind of coming from the middle here, I've darkened in the left side of this one and the right side of these ones, okay, and left kind of a little bit of light on the inside. So, but going back to the drying aspect of inks, you know, they can dry dull, but what I always recommend is spraying your scenes afterwards with like an acrylic spray seal. It doesn't make things fade resistant. I mean, there's a UV Krylon spray. That's Krylon's brand, if you're unfamiliar with them. But you know, I don't know if it's going to really protect it out in, like, if you have something out in full sunlight or something like that. I don't think it's going to really you know, help it for very long. But you know, I could be mistaken. But just a matter of kind of experimenting with it, you know, if you want to test that out. Okay, so adding a little bit more tone in here, adding some shadows to some of these areas. This is a sepia color, just kind of going in and reintroducing, well, I don't know if I'm reintroducing, but introducing some additional brown tones over the tops of all these other colors. Naturally, we had some of the inks from the surrounding color scheme in that shack as well. Otherwise, it would really stand out if it didn't have some you know, common colors used throughout all of the different objects. But going back in and just adding a slightly warmer tone, earthy tone to that cabin, just to make it stand out from, say, this color scheme up here. Okay, so, oh, and let's see here. I wanted to do something else in the water. I wanted to add some additional texture in there. I really like how these, this stamp called the Tiny Rocks looks in scenes. Okay, let me see, I have to figure out what color to do. I think I'm going to stamp, it's just basically this texture, by the way. Sorry, gotta get that to focus, okay? And I don't want it to stand out, well, I should say that, but I was going to say I don't want it to stand out too much, but, well, let's see how it goes. Okay. It stands out, actually it stands out quite a bit because the background is really dry. And this is really wet. So, but remember, when I spray this thing, it'll bring out the vibrancy of the whole, you know, surrounding area, so the background will look much darker than what it looks like now. It's one of the things about letting things dry and then working on them, you know. If you don't know it, see, that really stands out right there. kind of dimensionally on that, but the background is going to get as dark or darker than that wet print of that tiny rocks. Anyways, I'll put it in the beginning of the video anyways, so you'll see what it looks like. Let me put this back on here. I think I'm going to stamp it in a darker tone too. So I'll have it in browns in the background, and maybe I'll go... I was thinking about black, but maybe I'll go with that dark brown that we used earlier in the scene down here. Okay, so it's kind of a medium brown in those existing impressions. And let's go with a dark brown here, maybe in the foreground, so it's a little bit darker, closer to you. Let me see, maybe I won't go for the full impression of this next time. Let me wipe off some of those rocks. Okay, so maybe I'll wipe off these bottom ones. So you can do selective impressions with just some very small stamps as well as your larger ones. You know, just use the portions of the stamp that you want. Okay, let's go here and here. Okay. A little bit more dimension and texture in the scene. So one of the really fun things about scenic stamping is the repetition of imagery that you can do. You can stamp out, you know, multiple trees like that. It's what makes rubber stamping kind of a really fantastic tool for doing landscapes, doing scenics, is that there's so much repetition of form and nature, and that's exactly what a rubber stamp has been designed to do. You know, it's about repetition. Okay, so that's stamped out there. I like what that looks like quite a bit. Let's do this now. Now, when I was applying the tone, this is going to get very dark out here on the, you know, the whole background once I spray it, okay? But it isn't quite as dark on the, you know, kind of this vignette with my black as I want it to be. So I'm going to add some additional black, and that's the reason why, is because when I was adding the black, when I was applying the tone, the page was very wet. So it was almost like, in some ways, I was removing some of the ink as much as applying it in some ways, you know, kind of when the, you know, the paper starts to get very saturated, you're kind of applying wet into wet, so it's kind of pulling off some of that tone, which isn't a bad thing. You know, it allows you to apply kind of smoother applications of ink as they transition from one into the next. But, on the other hand, if you want something to get really, you know, dark, or if you want something to have a full saturation of something, it's kind of hard to apply without letting the ink dry and set up a little bit, soak in, you know, through the surface of the paper. Okay, so see that? It's kind of framing off that top a lot more than it was before. Right? So, what I do above, I like to do below as well, in terms of creating a vignette. Kind of helps on the framing. It contains the viewer's attention, I think, you know, in terms of the subject matter or whatever it might be. The focal point. bring in a little bit more into the perimeter here, kind of using a dry brush. Touch, my black pad is not super juicy at this point in time, so it's not a precarious type of application of a very dark tone right here with the black. And then when I'm inking it up, it's, you know, it's kind of more, it looks more gray in appearance, especially applying it with a sponge, you know. Okay. Now, one of the things that I mentioned that might look kind of interesting in here is some fireflies. So kind of making the background a little bit darker will make those kind of features stand out a little bit more, because they will be light in value, and hopefully look like they're glowing. All right, so what I'm going to do is I don't have like a lime green gel pen, or do I? Yeah, maybe I do. I'm not sure if it's working though. I haven't played around with this one in years. Huh, it's flowing pretty good. What is this? Oh, it's Uniball Signo, no wonder. Okay, this is a kind of a lime green gel pen. Okay. And we don't have fireflies in California as far as I know, but I was doing this kind of firefly look one time, and whatever you call them, lightning bugs. Someone told me, oh, you know, I was doing these little white ones. Someone said, oh, you should add a little green to that. She says they look green. And so I'll do that too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go with a little white one. Sometimes I don't like it too green, you know, so what I'll do is maybe I'll do a little white dot, and I'll add that little green one kind of in front of it. Or on top of it, not in front. Well, I guess it would be in front, but... So each one of these little dots will represent a little firefly. Trick to doing these little features like this, like little stars or whatever, is kind of the tendency is to kind of really space them out super evenly, but it's kind of hard to work against that. You have to kind of go against your kind of I don't know, these inclinations. So I have to kind of consciously think about it as I'm laying these things down. Okay, so we have all these little irregularly, I can't speak this morning. But anyways, here are these little things hovering about. Now let's add a little green feature, maybe not to all of them, but this green, if you know that kind of combination, you've probably seen it out there, but purples and greens, or well, certain versions of purple and green tend to look pretty good together. I don't know what they are on the color wheel. I don't think they're complementary, but they seem to pair fairly well. Okay, so adding a little bit of that in there. And then we'll get the glow going with the pigment ink. So this is knocking down the value of the white. You know, the white is going to stand out the strongest, but hopefully you're kind of picking up a little bit of that green tone. Kind of, I put a little green touch of it on top of all those, not all of them, but most of the white dots, okay? And you might have noticed in the other videos, you might guess that I'm someone that really loves a lot of detail, so I like doing the entire process of doing scenes, but compared to kind of the final touches, you know, this for me is where a lot of the fun is in terms of kind of my interest. I like a lot of detail, you know, and you know, within scenes, I like what's going on in the I don't know, the smaller areas, things that would kind of be about kind of, I don't know, initiating kind of further inspection by the viewer. And I mean, in this case it would be me, but you know, if you're giving a card to someone, okay, now you really need to take off a lot of this ink right here. It's the Colorbox Pigment ink, and I don't know if I've re-inked that before, but it's a really old pad, but it just seems to have a ton of ink in it still. The pad even, the foam even seems to kind of be breaking down and kind of smashing, you know. It's not a great looking pad at this point in time, but see that? It's all indented, the foam's like breaking down, but gosh, there is a ton of paint in there still. So I'm kind of dry brushing this over some of these little dots. Oops. That's way too much. Let me zoom in. That's way too much ink. So the beauty of this pigment ink is you can just kind of take it and wipe it right off the surface. Okay. The color box one does that, like a brilliance, you know, might kind of stick a little bit more. So be careful with like the brilliance ones. The brilliance ones are kind of made to dry on like glossy cardstock or whatever cardstock you're using kind of faster, so kind of be careful about using that. I would use the color box one. I don't think one's better than the other. I use the color box one, you know, for faster drawing things, like if I want to stamp a foreground or something like that. Using white ink, I don't want to use color box because it just, you know, won't dry, you know, unless you want to emboss with it. But the brilliance works really great. It's a little bit, I think the brilliance might be a little bit more opaque too, I'm not sure. So if you don't want kind of dark foreground things, like in a winter scene, you want to have like an icy branches in the foreground that, you know, they're white, then the brilliance one's the way to go. Okay. Now, when I spray this, little things like that pigment ink might disappear, so they're going to be a little bit less opaque. Okay. Okay, so there's some little hovering, glowing insects. That's what it'll look more like at arm's distance. The natural viewing distance, probably. That's what it looks like close up. Seems like I can use another one like there. I think I did that thing where they're all kind of evenly spread again. A little bit. Let's add a little bit more green to some of these. I think it can use it again a little bit more. The pigment ink obscured that kind of that hue a little bit because it's a much lighter green. So let's go and just add a little touch up to it. So, you know, it's not really a linear process of, okay, you're going to add, you know, this color, then this color, and this color, and never go back to it, you know. In the entire process, you can always kind of keep working things a little bit, adding a little bit more. Going back to a certain color, you know, adding foreground. So it's not like you have to, you know, stamp out composition, color, foreground, you know, highlights or something like that. As you saw, you know, stamped out the foreground, and then I went back and added a little bit more black to that. If I want to, you know, come in here a little bit more with, let's say, you know, like a magenta or something like that, that might be something you might want to do, you know, at this point in time, if you want to add something and really strengthen some other aspect of what you've already laid down. You can do that, like right up here. So that kind of, now remember, this whole thing's going to get darker too, but if I want, you know, kind of stronger magenta tone, you can go back and add a little bit more, or a lot more, whatever you want to do, and just lay it over the top. We'll see what it's going to look like after it's sprayed. It's one of those other kind of unknown things, you know, when you get into it. You know, how bright are certain colors going to be? It's like if you stain wood, you know, you see all the layers of depth in the wood come out after you kind of spray it. There's, you know, or stain something. Okay, now I'm going to avoid going over those, you know, those little fireflies with this ink because it'll color them right out. But coming in with a little bit more of this magenta that, you know, was kind of lost with all the layering going down. Lost in terms of kind of surface visuals. It will definitely affect the overall, having that as a sub-layer, especially when you spray it. Okay, visually taking an eye, doing a little inspection of the overall here, seeing if anything else, you know, could be added for additional effects. Here's one of those little things that I, you know, definitely don't do in like a stamp along or something like that, but all these little rocks down here, okay, they look okay as is, but yeah, these are the little, you know, final touches that you can do that kind of might enhance it a little bit more, but I'm going to go in with some of this alcohol pen and add some little shadows underneath some of these rocks, okay? And I'll do it within the color scheme that I've established here, kind of in these pink, magenta tones. Okay, so just adding a little bit of a base shadow underneath some of these so that now these little tiny rocks, you know, we're establishing kind of an opacity to them, you know. We're saying that they're solid so that they're casting a shadow. Now, because there are various values running in here, in the darker areas like that dark streak right here, okay, maybe I'll add a darker shadow. So, you know, some of the shadows in the light are like that. Maybe some shadows in the darker areas might be a little bit stronger and darker in value in those areas. So over here we'll add a darker, you know, color within that color scheme. And I think that kind of adds to the, I don't know, the lighting scheme, whatever, sophistication. You know, shadows in the dark are darker shadows than shadows in the light, I guess you can say. So, alright, so that added a little bit of depth to those areas. Let me see if I can, see if we can zoom in here. Okay, so You can see, like in this streak of purple, there's a little bit of a purple in there, but like right in here, it's more of that pink shadow because that little streak of light is lighter, so you wouldn't have as deep a darker shadow. Some of these rocks over here on this side are using that purple as well. So, I mean, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be broken down analytically so far, like, oh, that rock shouldn't have had that purple in it or something like that. You know, just play around with it and see if you like something or not. Okay, now we have the sky up here. We have these little fireflies down in the water, creating this little illuminated landscape. But why don't we reiterate a couple things going on down here in the sky? I don't want to do too many of these, they'll stand out too much, but maybe I'll, we have these little fireflies down here, and maybe in the sky I can add in, a few little stars. It kind of creates this kind of relationship between the two areas, with similar kind of textures. Okay, see what that does there. I think it makes it a little bit more interesting. And because some of these fireflies down below have a little bit of green in them, probably can't see it on the camera very much, but maybe I'll put a couple little stars green. Maybe it's Neptune or something. But those are the types of little details that probably most would not see. Okay? But I think when observing the overall, kind of the viewers of your scene will, I don't know, I think they tend to tune into it kind of subconsciously as far as like continuity goes between certain areas. It kind of creates a little bit more of a harmonious balance, having similar colors, similar textures, whatnot. Not that you can't do a scene where it's, blue up top or in the sky and, different colored waters, blue-green down below or something like that with, whatever, woodsy colored huts, shacks, whatnot. But kind of creating relationships within all those different components and different layers of depth create an overall kind of balance and, like I said, continuity with the whole. So anyways, let's see. That was really fun to do. I'm thinking about matting this one. I don't mat all my scenes, but this one I think I will. I'm not sure if I have like a magenta colored matte or paper to mat this on, but anyways, I'm going to spray this in right now, and I'm going to see how it turns out. But I'll put that in the beginning of the video, which if you watch this you would have seen. So I'm kind of curious to see how the layers of depth look in terms of the color scheme with the sprayed. So anyways, hope you enjoyed the scene and video and color scheme in this case. And yeah, it was a lot of fun to do. I liked all those little kind of hovering little textures down there with the fireflies. I think they added a lot to it. So extra dimension through additional touches and textures. Thanks for watching and tuning into the channel.